Okay, so you're here, and I think it's safe to say you're here because you want to get to the good stuff quickly, right? Skip the fluff. You want to just know what matters. And today, we're going to do that, but not with, the latest breaking news or anything, but with something ancient, something you might even read back in high school.
Yeah, exactly. Forget scrolling endlessly, right? We're diving deep into Sophocles' Antigone. Think of it not as like some boring old play or whatever, but like more of a crash course on the big questions we all face, even thousands of years later.
And our source material for all this, well, it's pretty interesting. We've got a lecture here, a classroom lecture, actually. Picture yourself as a sophomore sitting in an English class, just trying to wrap your head around this incredible play. And that's our mission today, really, to pull out the absolute key insights from that lecture and give you a shortcut to understanding Antigone. Like, what are the timeless conflicts? What are the questions that still matter to us today? That's what we're after.
Absolutely. So to really get Antigone, you've got to remember it's not a standalone story. It's actually part of a trilogy focusing on this one messed up family, the House of Oedipus. And it all takes place in Thebes, this city that just can't catch a break. It's full of suffering.
That House of Oedipus. Now, that's a name that rings a bell, right? Vaguely remember something about killing his dad and marrying his mom.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Oedipus's life was full of, let's say, unfortunate choices. And the result, 4 kids caught in the middle of all this drama. And when our play starts, 2 of them, the sons, Euclides and Polynices, they've already offed each other in a battle.
Yikes. Talk about family drama. So that's where we find ourselves at the start of Antigone.
Exactly. And right off the bat, King Creon, who's in charge now, he lays down the law. Euclides fought for Thebes, so he gets a hero's burial, the whole 9 yards. But Polynices, nope. Labeled a traitor for attacking his own city. Creon says his body is to be left out in the open, no burial, nothing.
So right there, boom. That one decision is like the spark that ignites the whole conflict of the play.
Yeah, and it might seem like no big deal to us, right? Like, oh, someone doesn't get a proper burial. But in ancient Greece, that was a huge thing. The lecture really drove home this point. Like, anthropologists will tell you, if you want to understand a culture, look at how they treat their dead. It reveals their values, their beliefs, everything.
Totally. It's like their whole worldview is wrapped up in those rituals.
Right. And the ancient Greeks had this very specific view of what happened after death. They believed that the soul traveled to Hades, the underworld. But to get there, you had to cross the river Lethe and that river. It washed away all your past memories, making you ready for reincarnation. But here's the catch. A proper burial was absolutely essential to make that whole journey possible.
Wow. So being denied a burial wasn't just disrespectful. It was like condemning someone's soul to wander aimlessly.
Exactly. It was a fate worse than death.
Okay, so enter Antigone. She learns about Creon's law from her sister Ismene, and, well, she's not having any of it. Antigone is like, I'm burying my brother. End of story. Like, she doesn't even hesitate.
Yeah, Antigone's response is immediate and absolute. Creon's law. She doesn't care. She's going to do what she believes is right. But Ismene, on the other hand, she's more practical. She's like, hey, we're women. We got to obey men and their laws. This is dangerous.
Yeah, you can almost see her like weighing the risks, right?
Exactly. That difference between the sisters is really important. Ismene represents how women were supposed to act in that society. But Antigone's defiance was huge, especially for the time. I mean, think about it back in ancient Greece, to have this strong female character who's willing to risk everything to go up against a powerful man, that was a big deal.
It's still a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so then there's Creon. He's definitely painted as this forceful leader who's convinced that the only way to keep a society stable is through absolute obedience to the law, unity above all else.
Yeah, and his philosophy is pretty straightforward, too. He's basically saying, there's one authority, that's me, I make the rules, and everyone follows them, no exceptions, any disobedience. That's a threat to the whole system.
Like my way or the highway kind of vibe.
Totally. And if we step back a little, we can see this is about the age-old struggle between order and justice. Creon honestly believes he's doing what's best for Thebes. The lecture even went into detail about the brutal punishment for breaking his law, stoning. They'd literally throw rocks at you until you died. It was awful.
That's intense. So I'm guessing things are about to get real messy.
Oh, yeah. So, spoiler alert, someone does bury Polynices. Just imagine Creon's reaction when he finds out. He is furious, and he wants whoever did this to pay.
Uh-oh. This can't be good.
Nope, not at all. The lecturer actually told this story about a student who was always causing trouble in class, just to illustrate how stubborn Creon was. Like, once he made a rule, he had to enforce it no matter what, otherwise he'd look weak.
It's kind of like that classic assistant principal dilemma, right? You set a precedent, and now you have to follow through. And it gets even more complicated because, remember, Creon also promised Oedipus he'd take care of his children.
Right. He made a promise, and now he's stuck between a rock and a hard place. So in his mind, he has to enforce the law, even though it's causing all this turmoil.
So it's a classic power play, right? But he created this situation himself. It's like a self-inflicted wound.
Totally. And it really makes you think, right? Like, when is it okay to bend the rules, even if they're the rules you created? What happens when doing the right thing goes against what's considered lawful? Antigone really throws those questions at us.
For sure. So, as you might expect, Antigone gets caught. And here's the thing. She doesn't even try to deny it. She's straight up like, yep, I buried him. What are you going to do about it?
It's almost like she wants to be punished for doing what she believes is right.
Right. Like she's challenging Creon's whole authority.
Exactly. And you can just sense Creon's frustration.
Yeah.
The lecturer pointed out that some of his anger might come from the fact that he can't intimidate Antigone. It's like he expects her to back down because she's a woman.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Like he underestimates her because of her gender.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's Ismene. She tries to take some of the blame, but Antigone is like, nope, this is all me. She owns her actions completely. And there's even this echo of Oedipus, their father, in her stubbornness, her unwillingness to back down.
Okay, so now we've got Haman entering the scene. He's Creon's son, and he also happens to be engaged to Antigone. Talk about complicated family dynamics.
Oh yeah, this is where it gets really messy. At first, Creon's like, I'm not going to stone her. Instead, he decides to lock her up in a cave with just enough food and water to survive for a bit. He's basically burying her alive, right? Maybe he thinks this way. It's not directly his fault if she dies.
Yeah, it's like a loophole, but even crueler somehow.
Oh, exactly. It's still a death sentence, just a slower one. And what happens next is this powerful clash between Haman and Creon. It's like watching a classic battle between the younger generation and the older generation, where the younger one sees the older one's stubbornness and thinks, dude, what are you doing?
That okay boomer moment, like a timeless struggle.
Right. Haman pleads with his dad. You're being unreasonable. Everyone thinks you're wrong. Don't do this. But Creon is so caught up in his power that he doesn't listen. And then Haman says something that really highlights the weight of family ties. He says to Creon, if you hurt Antigone, I will never speak to you again. And then he just walks out.
Ouch, that's a gut punch. It's like that threat, that silence, it just hangs in the air. It shows how final these family breaks can be.
It is, right. And the lecturer even connected this back to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, to Lord Capulet's ultimatum to Juliet. Like this theme of parents and children at odds, it's been around forever. It shows you the impact Sophocles had, even on writers centuries later.
And then, just when you think things can't possibly get any more intense, boom, in walks Tiresias, the blind prophet.
Yeah.
And Tiresias isn't your average fortune teller.
Yeah.
He's like this legendary figure in Greek mythology, right?
Oh yeah, he's a really unique character. In the myths, he'd lived as both a man and a woman, so he had this like dual perspective on life, this deeper understanding of human nature, and the fact that he remembered both lives. Supposedly that's what gave him his ability to see into the past and the future.
It's like he'd walked in everyone's shoes, experienced it all.
Right, so even though he's blind, he could see things others couldn't. And he shows up and he basically tells Creon straight up, look, what you're doing, leaving Polynices unburied, condemning Antigone, it's pissed off the gods, and there will be consequences. I think the lecturer mentioned he used to read the future by examining bird guts, which is, yeah.
Not the most pleasant visual, but hey, whatever works, right? So Creon hears this and...
Well, you can probably guess. At first, he totally dismisses Tiresias, even accuses him of taking bribes. But Tiresias isn't backing down. He lays it all out, predicts that Creon's pride will lead to multiple deaths. It's chilling.
It's like that moment when someone tries to warn you, but your ego is so big you just can't hear it.
Yeah. It's that classic hubris, right? That fatal flaw of overconfidence and pride. You see it in leaders all the time. They become so convinced they're right that they ignore any advice, even when it could save them.
So Creon basically ignores all the warning signs. Then what?
Well, finally, something clicks. Maybe it's Tiresias' words, maybe it's the mounting pressure, but Creon realizes, oh crap, I might have screwed up. So he tries to fix things. But here's the tragic irony. He goes to bury Polynices first.
Oh, that's just awful.
It is. By the time he gets to the cave where Antigone's imprisoned, it's too late. We don't see it directly, but a messenger comes in and describes the whole horrific scene. Antigone has hanged herself. Haman finds her, tries desperately to bring her back, and then when Creon arrives, he takes his own life.
Oh, no. That's just heartbreaking.
And it doesn't stop there. When Creon's wife hears what happened, she takes her own life too. The lecture ended that part with this really powerful image, Creon walking in, carrying his son's body. He's lost everything, and it's all because of his own actions.
Yeah, that's heavy. It really shows how one bad decision can have this ripple effect, how everyone's fates are intertwined. So we've just gone through this very, very dark story, and the lecturer even mentioned that one student described it as super depressing. But I think Sophocles might say, well, that's life, kiddo. It's full of pain and suffering.
Right. And the lecture made this really interesting distinction. It's not just about the suffering that's imposed on us, but also the suffering we sometimes choose, even seek out. Like, think about the ups and downs of love, right? It's messy, it can be painful, but we go for it anyway. Sophocles seems to be saying that hardship is just woven into the fabric of being human.
It's like he's saying we can't escape it, so we have to figure out how to live with it.
Exactly. And another thing the lecture highlighted was this constant clash between youth and old age, those misunderstandings between generations that play out over and over again. Antigone versus Creon, Haman versus Creon. It's that sense of being trapped in your own time and not being able to fully understand those who came before you or even those who are coming after.
It's like a constant communication breakdown, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's not just in the play. The lecture actually referenced something Margaret Mead said back in 1975 about how the generation gap was widening. And it's kind of crazy how relevant that still feels today. Like, our views are shaped by our experiences, by the world we grew up in, and that makes it hard to see things from another person's perspective. Think about it. A sophomore in high school probably thinks they're so mature compared to, like, a sixth grader, but then their parents are looking at them like, honey, you have no idea.
Oh, for sure. That's a never-ending cycle.
It is. And then at the heart of it all, there's Antigone's argument, her belief that divine law, that higher moral code, trumps human law. It's like she's saying, my conscience, my sense of what's right is more important than any rule a king can make. And that really makes us think, right? Like, what happens when we believe a law is unjust? What's our responsibility then?
It's a huge question, especially today, when we're constantly having to grapple with those gray areas.
Right. And then there's the family drama, the way things fall apart between Creon and Haman. It's just devastating. And Creon's words, they're so harsh, so dismissive. It shows how easily communication can break down within families, especially when power dynamics are involved.
It's like he pushes his son away at the exact moment he needs him most. And another thing that's so fascinating about this play is how it tackles gender dynamics. The lecture pointed out that back in ancient Greece, the audience probably would sided with Creon, seeing him as the one trying to maintain order. But today, a lot of people connect with Antigone. They see her defiance, her willingness to stand up to a powerful man as heroic.
It's like her story resonates differently with modern audiences. We're more aware of power imbalances, especially when it comes to gender.
Right, and you've got Ismene, too, representing that traditional view of women being obedient. She's like the foil to Antigone, who's out there breaking the mold.
Yeah, it's like Sophocles was already prompting us to think about gender roles, about how women were perceived and how they challenged those perceptions. It makes you wonder, like, even today, why do some women stay in relationships that are clearly harmful? It's complicated.
It really is. Okay, so we've gone deep into Antigone, and it's clear this isn't just some old story, right? It's a story about power and justice and family, about how we navigate those big questions that never really go away.
Exactly. It's a story about those timeless struggles.
Yeah.
Our personal beliefs versus the laws of society, the ties that bind us and the ways they break, and that age-old struggle to understand each other across generations.
And it all boils down to this question, right? In a world where we're constantly facing these competing values, these different authorities, where do you draw the line? Where do you say, this is where I stand, this is what I believe, even if it means going against the grain?
Right. Like, has thinking about Antigone's dilemma changed how you see things? Has it given you any new perspective on that struggle? That's something I think we all need to consider.